Welcome everyone. So thank you very much for joining us today for today's webinar, which is 5 tips for building an effective business strategy. My name is Dan Sanders, and I'm going to be the moderator for the webinar today. Before I hand over to our presenter, just a couple of sort of housekeeping points for you all. If anyone has any technical issues throughout the session today, please just put a little note into the attendee chat box just to make us aware, and one of the team will be on hand to help you out. And also for today's webinar, there is going to be a Q&A session at the end. But what would be really helpful is throughout the session today, if you could pop some of the questions into the chat box, the attendee chat box, then that will allow us the opportunity to collate the questions. I'll be collating them, and then I'll be feeding these back to the presenter at the end. So we'll have hopefully sort of about 10-15 minutes time to answer your questions then. So please, please do get these into the chat box. It is useful, and hopefully we can get read as many of them out as we possibly can. Okay. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to our presenter today, which is one of our associate consultants for the IMechE L&D team, and it's Phil Slater. And I'll hand you over to him right now.
Thank you, Dan. Much appreciated. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome from wherever you are in the world. I've seen a couple of people indicate where they're joining us from so far, from Qatar and from York, which is just up the road from me. I'm in Wakefield, West Yorkshire. Please feel free to add your location in as I speak. It's always nice to know where people are connecting from. Welcome to today's webinar. As Dan said, 5 tips for building an effective business strategy. So we have a little bit of an agenda. I'll be speaking for around about 35 minutes. I'll share some opening messages with you in a moment or two. And then we will move on and have a look at how we're defining the word strategy for this session and how that plays into the offerings that the IMechE provide in terms of additional training and additional support that would be available to you post-webinar. Then I'll walk us through the 5 tips. I'll bring those to life, and then I'll also sort of answer my own question, really, which is about, so how do we do that then? And then, as Dan said, towards the end, there will be a Q&A session. However, please feel free to drop any questions into the chat box as we go. Possibly, I might pause if I see a question jumping out of the screen at me and answer it as we go. But more likely, we'll deal with them at the end. But please feel free to kind of interact, share your stories as well. Share your examples of when you've worked on strategy before, the things that you've done that have worked well. Perhaps if you feel confident enough, also maybe the things that didn't go so well, but you've learned a really valuable lesson from that you can share with your fellow attendees today. The more interactive we make it, the better the learning experience will be for all of us. I haven't delivered one of these webinars yet where I haven't learned something from one of the questions or one of the stories or one of the comments that one of the attendees has made. So that would be great. And I'm seeing people sharing where they're from: Aberdeen, Cornwall, Cardiff, all parts of the UK. And I know we've got people from further afield than that as well. And it's really great, as always, to hear and see so many of you connecting to one of these webinars. So as we said, welcome. Really great to have you. A bit more about me. So my name is Phil Slater. Obviously, I'm an associate consultant for the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. So I work with IMechE to deliver many of their leadership and personal effectiveness and soft skills related training courses, and have done a number of these webinars over the last few years that I've worked in partnership with them. Prior to that, I've worked in a number of different industries. So I worked in financial services, I worked in mobile telecommunications, I worked for Atkins Global in the engineering industry, and have been responsible for leadership development in all of those businesses, but also developing teams, working on business transformation projects, working on culture change projects, and very much being part of the process of of designing and supporting the implementation and the measurement of the success of strategies at a team and organizational level. And when I'm talking about organizational level, I'm talking about within the UK, but also globally, and recognizing the cultural differences that come into that as well. So hopefully I've got something to offer. The content that we'll share with you today is a setup for some potential development that you can get elsewhere, that which we'll communicate to you at the end. But as I said, your questions and your comments will also be really useful. So use the chat box to help with our interactivity. As Dan said, mostly we'll facilitate questions at the end, but more than happy, perhaps, if I see one that really interacts with a bit that I'm speaking about in that moment, I might stop and answer the question as we go. But we'll see. At the end of the webinar, I think Dan's already starting to communicate some information about that. You will have the opportunity to receive the slides and to receive a recording of this webinar. All you will need to do is use the link that Dan shares and sign up to the IMechE LMS, and you'll be able to get the slides and also see a recording, so you can work through the information I share, perhaps at your leisure. Okay, so that's the opening messages. Loads of different quotations that you can find around the topic of business strategy. It's one of those kind of challenges in all my 25 plus years of business that different organizations have kind of stewed over and tried to get right with varying degrees of success. But the kind of the why have it quote that you can have here is really quite useful. And you know, this rowing doesn't help if the boat is heading in the wrong direction. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly worked in teams and for organizations and with organizations where I spend some time with them, and I notice how hard everybody is working. And then I speak to some of the perhaps senior leaders usually, and I talk about the direction that they want their business to go. And the two things that I'm seeing, the hard work from the teams, from the departments, from the employees, doesn't seem completely aligned, and sometimes not even closely aligned to the direction that the senior leaders of the business are wanting it to go in. So sometimes that's because there isn't a strategy at all, and sometimes it's because we haven't utilized the behaviors that underpin strategy, and it hasn't been communicated properly, and we haven't made sure that all of our stakeholders at all levels have been involved, which helps, as we shall see as we go through the tips. So I really like that quote. Rowing doesn't help if the boat is heading in the wrong direction. We're working really hard, we're rowing the boat, but this is not where we wanted the business to go. Okay, so it helps kind of lead us into our definition of what we mean when we're talking about strategy. And it really is the direction of travel, you know, the mission of the business, the vision, the where we want to get to and how we want to get there. So strategies can be, and often are in some organizations, huge documents that are shared with sometimes only a few people, and sometimes they're shared wider than that, but there's a lot of information in it. And other strategies can quite simply be a couple of pages, a couple of slides on a PowerPoint. Both are equally useful, but it's more about what happens next. It's what we do with it and how do we communicate it. So within the strategy, of course, we want to be able to identify, so what is it that we're trying to achieve? What's our overarching vision? What do we want to be famous for, as I'll address later? And then if we understand that and everybody has real clarity around that, so therefore, what do we need to do to achieve that? So the what goals, what objectives, what tasks do we need to deliver? And what does that look like in terms of a time frame? Many organizations work on 3-year strategies, 5-year strategies, but that will be dependent on the organization and the industry. A really important part is this next one. The how will these goals be achieved? The behaviors that we use, the values that we hang our hat on. All right. So we're trying to create strategies that inspire, engage employees, that our internal and external customers can feel confident about, that we're the kind of partner, the kind of business that they can work with. And that is, of course, a lot down to what is going to be delivered, but it's how we deliver it is the bit that makes it sustainable, utilizing the right kind of behaviors. We also want people to understand how they make a difference, how the work that they do on a day, week, month, yearly basis over the period of a 5-year business strategy makes a contribution to the successful delivery. We know from all of the research that we do that people really need that. It gives them a sense of purpose. It helps them to understand the point of them, and certainly helps them in those more difficult moments that all individuals have, all employees have in the businesses. It should, within the strategy, will know, helps us to understand what success will look like. Sometimes those are really clearly defined metrics. Will improve sales by 20%, whatever it might be. But sometimes it's about what will we see the people in the business doing, how will our customers respond, what will it look like, what will it feel like, and having those conversations are really useful. Documenting those conversations help people to understand what's expected of them, but actually the conversation itself helps to engage and inspire people to feel like this is something that they want to be part of. And of course, like any project, because essentially building and implementing a strategy is a project, we also take the opportunity to identify barriers, risks, and have some conversations around how they might be mitigated or removed or reduced in some way. So those are the kind of things that we look at when we're talking about strategy. We can talk about strategy from an organizational level, or we can talk about strategy from a team to team level. And sometimes people have their own personal strategy, but essentially the framework is the same. So the 5 tips, and it's probably worth saying, and I'll remind you at the end that the 5 tips come from a strategy, managing strategy, building strategy course that the IMechE run, that will be available a number of times over the next 12 to 18 months in different parts of the UK and possibly virtually as well. So we will build on this and provide much more detail on that particular course. So look out for the course dates post this course. But the first of our tip, and this is linking into this point about giving people a purpose, helping people to visualize and be part of the creative process that helps us to understand what our organization is here to do, what our team can achieve. And it's borrowed from Stephen Covey, for whom I'm sure some of you will be familiar, his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I can even tell you it's habit number 2. And it talks about starting with the end in mind. So whatever plans you put in place, whatever milestones we have to support the implementation and design of a strategy, we always have in the back of our minds, and often it's something that we clearly reinforce all of the time, what it is that we're actually trying to achieve. All right, so we're starting with the end in mind. Now, of course, some organizations, we might utilize the CEO or the managing director or some member of the senior leadership team, and they will just tell us what we're here to achieve. Okay, that's one way of doing it. It is much better if we take the opportunity to work collaboratively, to engage with a number of people from within the organization, sometimes from outside of the organization, to really have some stimulating, engaging, creative conversations, inclusive conversations that can help us to really articulate a really fantastic vision or mission that people can really get behind, using those different ways of thinking, the different lenses that people have because of the role that they play in the business, perhaps a role of a customer who sees the business from the outside looking in, just helps us give us some much richer data to work with. And then when we're looking at the nuts and bolts of the strategy, we've got something that can often be magical to help us. And there are lots of ways of doing this, lots of ways, and there's just a couple of methods that you can see on the screen there. And I've done both of these. I've facilitated both of these in training sessions or as a leader of a team that's trying to implement a strategy. And I've also had these done with me as well, done to me, I suppose. And I know they work. I know they work because they can create the output, which is what we're after in terms of a real image. But I also notice the energy and notice the creativity and notice people becoming more and more engaged when we involve them in these kind of exercises. So one that works for some. Okay, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but works for some is that we take a load of images. We, you know, the images might be an image of some children playing in a street, or it might be an area of natural beauty, or it might be a machine that looks like it's being built. And we ask people to select the image that they think best represents the organization or the team, and therefore what it could be, what best represents it. And we ask them to talk about it, why they chose that image, and we draw out the words, the phrases, and we use that part of the kind of the data that we collate together to think about, okay, so somebody said, I chose this particular picture because I like the teamwork. It represents innovation, it represents creativity, it represents hard work. And we use those words to help us and hang our hat on again when we're putting the strategy together. A human resources director that I used to work with in the financial services business a good number of years ago, she used to do this with her team every year in method number 2. She used to come in and she'd put on a slide at the beginning of each year. She said, what is it that we want to be? What is it that we want to be famous for? And it would be the similar. We'd have a conversation. What would good look like? What does good feel like? What will we hear our customers saying? What will we hear other types of stakeholders saying? And again, it helped us to kind of facilitate some information that we could then draw into our team strategy that we made sure would be connected to what the business was trying to achieve. Okay, so that's just 2 of any number of methods that you can do to help people to start with the end in mind, keep the end in mind front and center as we go through the design of the strategy phase and the implementation of the strategy phase. But there are others. So as we'll do as we get through all of this, if you've got any other ideas that you'd like to share, then please feel free to put them into the chat box, things that you come to mind now, or maybe things that you've done in your organizations already. We'd love to hear them. Tip 2, it links to this inclusivity piece. All right. And I'm sure that you will have your own experiences of working in organizations or being part of a process about developing a strategy. But tip 2 is consider a top-down, bottom-up approach to strategy development. And by that, we mean inclusivity. Quite often, with many of the organizations I've worked with, the strategy comes from the top only. All right. It doesn't mean it's a bad strategy. It doesn't mean it's not going to be a strategy that's going to bring collective and individual success, but it's very much being created at the top of an organization, right? And it will bring some success. But if we really want to engage and inspire and get those different viewpoints, if we can create forums where we can take a look at the strategy from a top-down and a bottom-up approach, it just gives us much more to work with. We're getting people who see the business, understand our customers, understand other stakeholders from a different perspective, and that can really add value. And as well as doing that, if you're involved in those conversations, of course, it can be very inspiring and engaging. But also, even if you're not, but you know that your colleagues are, it just helps us to feel better about the process, that we know that this isn't something that's being, even if it's a good strategy, even if it's not something that's being imposed upon us, it's something that we play a part in creating. So how might we do that? Again, loads of different ways of doing this. Using the channels of communication that a business have or a team have, making it part of the conversation formally and otherwise, using feedback for asking for input into a strategy. If it's a small business, of course, you just speak to people. But if it's a large global organization and you want to get some information quickly and give as many people as possible the opportunity to speak, then perhaps something like a feedback form or a survey would work. I would ask, and have worked in senior leadership teams that have done this and it works really well, that when we've got that operating rhythm of a business, that communication flow that exists in an organization, that we ask people to hold, each of the teams to hold a meeting, quite simply, pose some questions around strategy development. What kind of business do you want to work for? What do you think? What do you think we should be doing in the future? What do you think our customers would like from us? What new products might we have? How will our customer profile change over the next 5 years? We get people to have these discussions at team level, and we feed the information back up. Strategy forums work. Doesn't have to be hosted by senior employees, but often that kind of gives it some gives us some gravitas. As I said at the beginning, making sure where we can, as much as we can, that we engage all levels of employee in any kind of strategy development conversations. Of course, if we're working in an organization that has 10,000 employees, we're probably not going to have everybody in every meeting, of course not. But if we can have a cross section and operate and use all the channels of communication to give as many people a chance to have a say, then that adds real value and always, in my experience, always ends up with a better strategy in the end, a more richer, deeper strategy. We must communicate, underpins the success of everything. All right. We don't keep this to ourselves as a manager or a leader or even to a small project team. We want people to remain engaged, to feel excited about what's coming on. So using any of the communication channels that are available to you to keep everybody regularly updated on the progress of the strategy. It doesn't have to be hugely detailed. It can be a quick email update or a quick, video that the CEO sends or showing some outputs of a team working on particular elements of the strategy. All of these things are really useful and powerful. I'm just having a look at the chat box at the moment. I'm just pausing. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Robert, in many, no names mentioned, of course. I've been a strategy is really just aspiration. Yeah, the most senior tending to be the creative people refer that planning. How do you recommend pulling that out? And I do think that, Robert, we'll maybe address this at the end but it is about inclusivity. It's having a plan. It's having starting with the end in mind and focusing on the output that we have some great conversations. We utilize our creativity, but what we're here to do is achieve an output. And we have somebody potentially facilitating that, or we just make sure as part of our rules of engagement that how we go about this, that we make sure that that's done. So step 3, linking back to the fuel of all things that drives success in organizations. And this is this thing about communication. We have to make sure that we have communicated properly, that we understand what the top line of the strategy is, what the strategic goals are, and how they link to individual goals or tasks, so that people fully understand their purpose, the opportunity that they have to make the strategy a success, often linked within a performance management system or appraisal system, but not always. All right. And we have to make sure we've got this right. We can't just say, okay, we have a strategy and we have some strategic goals, so we'll send everybody an email out and say, right, we have communicated, we have done our job, tick in the box. That's not how it works. We have to make sure we've got truly effective communication, that we get people to demonstrate their understanding, we get people to give feedback, we give feedback to them, and we regularly review to make sure that everybody's on the page and they absolutely understand what we're trying to achieve, how we are supposed to achieve it in terms of values and behaviors, and specifically what purpose that they have and what opportunity they have to make a contribution. I have a story to share with you here. You may have heard it before. It also may be a bit of an urban myth, but I hope it's true, because it really kind of connects to what I'm trying to say here. In 1969, just before the United States put a man on the moon, and we're going to assume that they did. That's not the purpose of this discussion. All right. The president of the time, Lyndon Johnson, went to meet the team that were responsible for doing just that, for putting a man on the moon. So the people who were working there were asked to kind of dress in their Sunday best and be ready to meet the president. And obviously, the astronauts dressed as astronauts, and everybody else just dressed in their finer clothes. And he went along the line and he introduced himself to people and asked them what they did and spoke to them. And he got towards the end of the line, and there was an elderly gentleman there dressed in a suit, not the finest suit, but a suit nonetheless. And President Johnson's question to him was, "So what do you do here then?" And his answer was, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." All right. His actual job was he was the janitor. He was responsible for keeping the base and keeping everything clean and tidy. All right. But he didn't say, "Oh, I'm just the janitor. All I do here is clean." He recognized that, small or big, he was playing a part in achieving the mission, achieving the vision, which was to put a man on the moon. And if we can help our people in organizations understand their purpose, your purpose in whatever vision it is yours, we're creating, engineering projects that can change the world, rather than, oh, I just do admin, or I work in marketing. It's so much more powerful. So taking the opportunity to do that within tip 3 is really useful. So I'm just looking here. One idea, particularly in industries that aren't diverse, seek out employees with different lived experiences and make it clear that you are trying to uncover blind spot. Absolutely. That's exactly where the power comes from. Because often in leadership teams, it's people who have the same experiences, sometimes the same life experiences. They're often the same similar sort of age, a similar sort of background. And trying to open up with the diversity and certainly get people who think in a different way will absolutely enrich the creativity around the development and implementation of your strategy. All right, so how do we do this? So we talked about some of this already. Make sure all key stakeholders, involve your customers, involve your regulators if that's part of your industry, involve the local government, customers, the local community, because again, we're just building richer information. Make sure you have an appropriate communication plan that goes alongside the creation, implementation and measurement of the strategy. Use communication tools such as RACI, where we can make sure we understand who we need to communicate to and what we're going to communicate to. Carry out some stakeholder mapping exercise. It doesn't have to be long and detailed, but dotting the I's and crossing the T's and having a proper communication strategy alongside it can be really helpful. Recognize that people communicate in different ways. Recognize that we process information in different ways. Recognize that some people don't have the time to read a 50-page document. But we still want them to understand what's happening. So what other communication methodologies can we use? And regularly measure it, like any kind of project, any kind of longer term implementation. We don't just kind of do it, feel proud of ourselves and happy with the job that we've done, and it's going to be that way forevermore. Regularly evaluate the impact, ask people, get feedback to make sure that the communication that links to the strategy implementation and development is working as you want it to. And again, any other ideas that you can think of that you could put in the box, we always like to hear them. Okay, so we're moving on relatively swiftly. So tip 4. All right, so this links to the kind of what I've seen with organizations, and I understand why. It's often the pressure to deliver, pressure to give their customers what they want, is that the strategy focuses very much on the what we are here to deliver. All right, and even when they help individuals to understand what they are here to deliver, okay, it's only part of the story. Okay, because if we only focus on the what, it drives a certain culture and it drives a certain behaviors. And what we're really looking for here is sustainable relationships and a sustainable business strategy that people can engage with and feel a part of. And that's why we need to make sure, as well as we articulate the what needs to be delivered, but we also need to articulate how it should be delivered, the values that we operate within, the behaviors that we use. And it's more than just having value, as I like to say, values on a wall. I worked with one organization in the United States a few years ago, and they worked in an open plan office, and on a huge wall in the hugest font you could think of, they had their 5 corporate values, which represented how they were supposed to go about their business. And we were doing a session with the leadership team in one of the meeting rooms away from the open plan office. And I said to them, do any of you know what your values are? And none of them did. All right, even though they sat in an office that had the values on the wall. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting people to know the values off by heart, but we should at least know where we can access them. And we should try as leaders, particularly in terms of strategy development, to make that part of our conversation and make people understand that we measure people and we recognize the what at least the same as the how, at least the same as we do the what, so that we can build a sustainable strategy implementation that people can really get behind. So it's about the conversation. So when I'm having a conversation with my team around strategies and we talk about, so how we doing, what's been delivered, I also want to know how it's been done. All right, what behaviors did you do? Did you share your learning? Have we upset anybody along the way? Have we taken the opportunity to kind of engage outside of the team, outside of the organization with some of the stakeholders that we identified? Make sure that the behaviors and the values are documented within the strategy, because we can come back to that, if particularly if things don't go the way we want them to. But we can also use them to tell stories of where we have successes. So formal and informal reward and recognition schemes, where we say, yes, fantastic delivery of a particular task, a particular strategic goal, but let's also recognize some of the great behaviors that we saw, some of the great examples of the values being lived and breathed within this strategy implementation. It gives it the power. It gives it, I believe, and in my 25 years, it gives it the sustainability. It gives it the sustainability. It's not just about the what, it's about the how, and it's also about the why as well, helping people to really understand why we're doing it, why we're asking them to do certain things, because that gives them their purpose and helps them as we go through the process. Because no strategy, you might tell me different, but no strategy I've ever been involved in has ever been implemented without bumps in the road, without obstacles, without things where it doesn't quite go as we want it to do. All right. And we have to be ready for that. And we have to be able to kind of manage ourselves and our teams and the organization through it. And one way that we do that is making sure that people know the point of this, what we're trying to achieve, and how fantastic it will be if we do it, and what opportunity that they have personally to do that as well. So, as always, any ideas that you've got, put them in the chats, and we're not too far away from our Q&A session now. Just wanted to kind of to finish up the 5 tips for now, and you know, there are more tips, there are more ways of doing this than we're going to share on this particular webinar. There's lots of information out there and lots of opportunities for you to get additional support. But it's the same with project planning. Okay, we want to prepare. We want to make sure we've got something that we understand the direction of travel for the organization. We want to be able to communicate that in a way that's exciting and engaging, and easily understood for all of our stakeholders, to help them to understand the value that they can add. But if we over detail it, if we over engineer it, it can become a little bit more challenging to kind of move with the sands, or move with the universe as things change. All right, particularly when we're looking at strategy that might be a 5-year business strategy. All right, if we don't build in review periods into that, it can be really quite difficult, and we end up, you know, blinkered to what we'd said we were going to do 3 years ago, if we're 3 years into the strategy, and we're not factoring in the fact that you know, particularly in industries where things change so quickly, customers change, technology changes, we're not factoring perhaps the unknowns, the things that we now can see that we didn't know about 3 years before. So making sure that we create a strategy that has this phrase that you've possibly heard before: freedom in a framework. Okay, so we've got a direction of travel, we know our strategic goals, we understand the behaviors, but there is some license for people to be flexible around that, so that business can react actually in a more proactive way to potential changes that need to be made, rather than have to kind of dig their way out of all of the detail because some things hit them from left field, that makes that change really difficult to implement, and therefore can be disengaging for people and potentially derail the strategy and all the positives that you identified about that at the outset. So again, it's cultural, it's behavioral. So we talk openly about change. We don't use it as a dirty word. We talk about the opportunity that change brings us. We recognize that when we're creating a strategy, that we make sure we've got that flexibility within it, and we talk about that, and we talk about how we will utilize that. We try to use maybe develop some people, but certainly showcase and role model the right kind of mindsets. So we don't have a fixed mindset, it has to be this way, any obstacle is a derailer, it's a disaster, everything's going to go horribly wrong, rather than a growth mindset mean let's welcome change, let's take any obstacle or something that's changed in the world as a positive, as an opportunity to learn and grow. If we can showcase that mindset, particularly at a leadership level, it can be really helpful. Make sure the change process isn't overly complicated. You don't have to sign off 55 forms and get 66 signatures to change the type of pen that you're using. Keep it relatively simple. Empower people to make those decisions around the change that they can. As I said before, don't make sure the strategy itself isn't ultra prescriptive, because that will make it more difficult to manage the change process. Regular conversations with stakeholders, make sure that they're aware of the change, make sure that they can understand how we might need to utilize them to support the change. And remember that the conversations isn't just about what we're going to deliver in terms of a change, but how we're going to deliver it as well. And again, think about projects, think about your organization culture, think about any of the kind of ideas that you've got that enable you to kind of manage change, particularly in a strategic type of conversation that might be helpful for other people on this webinar to learn from, myself included. And just to kind of let you know, as I said, I've referenced a couple of this before, but it's a webinar and we speak for 35 minutes. And as I know will know, that the topic of strategy is a huge subject, and there are lots of different types of information that is available to you, and often opportunities to discuss it, not only in terms of how do you implement a strategy, but to get learning from different people, from different industries, from different businesses can be really helpful. And recognizing that it isn't just about the what in terms of the strategy, it's about the behaviors that underpin that as well. So you can see a whole range of courses that are available through the IMechE in the next few months that might be of interest to you, or perhaps for members of your team. You can see at the top right clearly, business strategy for engineering managers, 29th and 30th of November is essentially this webinar, but over 2 days, where we look at tools and techniques and models and theories, and give you an opportunity to actually build a framework for your own strategy that you can take back to your workplace and work with other people to kind of fill in the dots and create something that will really work for you. And you can see the other ones provide some of the behaviors and some of the other technical skills, knowledge, skills and behaviors around that would be helpful when it comes to building a strategy. And you can see how you go about booking those if you are interested. And of course, you'll get a recording of this if you want it afterwards, so you'll be able to come back to this slide if you need to. And it's available on IMechE's website as well. So I hope that was useful in 37 minutes or so that I spoke for. So I know that there have been some questions that have been coming in. So at this stage, I'll apologize straight away if we don't manage to answer everyone's question in this, but I know that Dan has been taking a selection, and he's going to play interviewer or questioner to me, and I will do my best to answer them as well as best I can. So Dan,
yeah, okay,
you're there.
Yeah, I am here, Phil. So yeah, thank you very much. That was a very interesting quick snapshot there within that webinar. There's so much information you need to provide, and it's quite hard to condense that into such a short period. But yes, I think as Phil has said, quite importantly, this does lead nicely onto the business strategy course that's coming up at the end of November. I've put a link into the chat box for those of you that are interested in attending this course for the 2-day. And as you know, reiterating what Phil said, it's much about getting those kind of tools and techniques and helping you to build a framework to build into this strategy for yourselves. So yeah, please do click through if you are interested in attending this course actually in person in London. Anyway, yeah, so great stuff, Phil. So one of the questions that's come up is from Simon Reynolds. He has said, do you have any tips for preventing in the urgent sense of firefighting situations, urgent work, distracting from work to develop the strategy?
Yeah, so it's about planning. It's about relationships, so that we have the kind of relationships in the workplace, or with our customers or with other stakeholders when we're comfortable to have those clear conversations about what we want to do, what our priorities are, where our focus needs to be, and what support we need from them to allow us to do that. And even if that is time, but also in terms of the organization, team, and individual planning of your own work, it's about looking at those tasks that we need to complete or those goals that we need to achieve, and we can think about those as what we might call business as usual, the day job, and also this strategy work, and plan them into into our diaries, into a project plan, and making sure that if we use, not a time management course, this one, although we do deliver time management courses, if we can use things like the urgent important matrix, where we can look at those lists and we can look at the things that we need to deliver, and we can look at the things that we can define in the moment, we can define as urgent and important. So the things that will really add value to the business and to what we're trying to achieve, but also those things that have a strict deadline would come under urgent and important. But what we do moving forward is we improve our planning process and the relationship building and the conversations that we have and our ability to be assertive. So we move more things out of the urgent and important box, so we can focus purely on the things that are important because they add value and they're linked to strategy, but also what we need to do for our customers. But we have more time to do it. And around that, we have the relationships. We're able to say to people, this is what I need to do. This is why I need to do it. And this is the support that I need from you in the nicest possible way. It's a challenge, though. I absolutely understand it's a challenge, but we can through relationships, through conversations, through planning, we can move forward with that in a more positive way.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Phil. One interesting question here from Mark Molyneux. He's asking around, he works in the rail industry, and he's looking at how do you develop an effective strategy when the future is so uncertain for them? And I believe he's relating it to obviously network rail.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think I mentioned at the beginning, I work for Atkins Global, and Atkins have a rail business. You may be familiar with it. So I remember some of the conversations that I had with people even way back then about the future of the industry. And I've worked with organizations who have been in similar positions. So the first thing, although I talked about many organizations building 3 years and 5 year strategies, then if you work in an industry where actually that length of future is a bit uncertain, then we perhaps can work on what does the next 12 months look like? Because actually, if you talk 5 years to people who are a little bit uncertain about what's going to be happening in 5 years, that can actually be disengaging. So we might want to just kind of limit it down to, okay, what do the next 12 months look like? All right. Or the other way to think about it, and I've seen this work to varying degrees of success, is we do a little bit of scenario planning in our strategy. So we have a 5-year strategy, perhaps, okay, but what we do is go into years 2 and years 3. If the business or the landscape or the competitors or the industry looks a bit like this is what we'll do. If it looks a bit like this is what we'll do. And maybe scenario 3 is let's leave that completely open and let's regularly review and keep our eye on it. So yeah, right. It's about working with the conditions that you have. So the principles are still the same. We still want to understand what's our mission, what's our vision, what we're going to do, and how we're going to do it, and how can we all be involved. But we might need to do it over a shorter time scale and have even more flexibility in the strategy to recognize the uncertainty that some companies and some organized industries are faced with. Still there, Dan?
Sorry, I am still here. I was talking. I was muted.
So no worries.
I'm talking to myself. Yeah. So hopefully that answered the. Thank you, Phil. I hope that answered the question for you. Question from Philip Cooper here. Mid-level managers face intense pressure to deliver work, but still need a department strategy. How do you balance time spent planning with the doing?
Yeah, it's a similar answer to the question that the first question that I gave. First of all, let me recognise, having been in a mid-level manager positions quite a lot of my career, I will always say that it's probably the most difficult position to be in any organisation, because you get it from all areas. You get it from your peer group, you get it from customers, you get it from the people who you're responsible for, and you get it from above. And it is about relationships. If you have, if you can show you're working out, and you take those opportunities to communicate in the right way at the right time with your senior stakeholders, to articulate what their support or the additional resources that you need from them, resource possibly being just time, then it positions you to have a greater chance of success. If you think about, you might have heard this phrase, the elevator pitch. All right, where you come out of the elevator and the chief executive says to you, who doesn't really engage with you that much really, but is a bit of aware of some of the things that you've been talking about and asking for, and they say, so what is it that you need from me to help you to be able to build your team strategy then? And if you don't have that answer in 30 seconds, all right, or at least the start of a really good answer, then we can't really be surprised when they go, well, that was my moment to become interested, to become engaged. But I don't have the right kind of response. So therefore I'm less likely to give you the support that you need. If we're able to show that working out, to show how implementation of a strategy can really add value to the business and really add value to that particular stakeholder, in this particular example, the chief executive, how's it going to make his or her life better? And we can answer that question in 30 seconds. And then we can say, and by the way, if you need more detail, I have a framework of a strategy that I can share with you. It positions us and allows us to align those challenges around the day job and also the strategic developments. Okay. One of the things that we'll talk, I don't want to make this too much about sales, but one of the things we would talk about on the course is absolutely how we manage those behaviors with our key stakeholders to allow that.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think we've managed to answer all the questions, Phil. So,
Great.
Which is great stuff. So, all I'd like to say is thank you very much for joining us today, Phil. I appreciate your time. And thank you very much for everyone who's come along to this webinar this afternoon. As in the link there, if you do want access to the recording of this, please do. There's a web link. You need to sign up onto our LMS, and it gives you access to this particular webinar, but all our previous ones as well. So anyway, thank you very much again, Phil, and hopefully any of you that are really interested, the 2-day course will be running at the end of November. Details of when that is and the link to signing up to that is in the chat box for you there. But other than that, I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.